Hello. I'm really glad you're here tonight. This hour is different from the rest of the day. It doesn't ask you to decide anything. It doesn't ask you to perform or explain or keep up. It simply invites you to lie still and let your thoughts move at their own pace. As the years pass, nighttime becomes a kind of companion, a place where the mind is free to wander without interruption, where history returns, not as a lesson, not as something demanding to be memorized, but patiently, like an old story told softly by firelight, where understanding settles in quietly, without needing dates or textbooks or proof. Later in life, the mind doesn't race the way it once did. It reflects, it revisits, it reaches across time and touches civilizations that rose and fell long before anyone alive today drew their first breath. And it does this most honestly when the lights are off and the world has gone silent. This space is for those thoughts, the ones that don't surface during the day, the ones that arrive only when you're alone with yourself, resting, remembering, and gently connecting with the deep, extraordinary story of our shared human past. Tonight, that story begins in a place most people have never heard of. A kingdom carved from Highland stone, settled into terraced hillsides, breathed into life by people who looked up at the same stars you're lying beneath right now and decided to build something that would last. Tonight, you're going to travel to the Kingdom of Da'amat. So take a slow breath. Let your body soften into the bed and allow this night to meet you where you are. And now, before we begin, if this kind of honest, gentle reflection speaks to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And down in the comments, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. There's something comforting about knowing we're all here together, scattered across time zones, but united in these late hours when the world finally grows still. So settle in, adjust your pillows, find a comfortable position, and know that for the next hour, you're not alone in whatever wisdom you're carrying, whatever understanding you've earned, whatever truths rise to the surface when the lights go out. Let's begin. Close your eyes now. Breathe slowly, and let the world you know begin to soften at its edges. Imagine you are standing on a ridge, a high ridge, somewhere in the northern highlands of what we now call Ethiopia. The air here is thin and clean. It carries the particular coolness of altitude, that sharp clarity you only find when you are far above the heat of the lowlands, when the sky feels close enough to touch. Below you, the land descends in great terraced steps, like a staircase carved by patient hands across the face of the mountain. And it was carved by patient hands, thousands of them, generation after generation of hands that knew this soil, that understood the rhythm of the rains, that looked at a steep and unforgiving hillside and saw not an obstacle, but a home. You are standing at the edge of one of the earliest known kingdoms in the entire Horn of Africa. You are standing at the border of Damat. The year is somewhere around 800 BCE, but you don't need to hold that number. Numbers are for the daylight hours, for the part of your mind that organizes and categorizes and keeps track. Tonight, you don't need to keep track of anything. Tonight, you simply need to breathe and look and feel the extraordinary age of this place settle into your bones like warmth. Da'amat. The name itself carries something ancient in the way it sounds. Some historians write it as damat, the vowels left out in the way that early Semitic scripts often worked, leaving the reader to hear the sounds between the letters, to fill in the breathing spaces of the word. Da'amat. Say it gently in your mind. Let it sit there. It belongs to a world so far removed from your own that reaching toward it feels almost like dreaming. And maybe that's exactly what it is tonight. A kind of dreaming, a kind of reaching. You settle into a comfortable position now. Your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches, the muscles behind your eyes soften, and as your body releases the last grip of the day, you find yourself descending into the landscape of this ancient kingdom. Not falling, descending, gently, the way a leaf descends from a high branch on a windless afternoon. The highlands of Da'amat were not empty when this kingdom rose. People had been living in these hills for a very long time, farming small plots, keeping cattle, moving with the seasons. But something happened around the 9th or 8th century, before the Common Era. Something changed, and the change came, in part, from across the water. To the northeast, across the narrow stretch of the Red Sea that we call the Bab el-Mandeb, lay the southwestern coast of the Arabian Peninsula. Ancient Yemen, a place of frankincense and myrrh, and a sophisticated civilization that had developed its own system of writing, its own gods, its own methods of governance and agriculture and trade. These were the Sabaeans, the people of the Kingdom of Saba, the land that some believe was home to the legendary queen who traveled to meet Solomon. And these people, these traders and explorers and migrants, crossed the water. They crossed it in boats loaded with goods and ideas and language and belief. And when they arrived on the African shore, something extraordinary began. You can imagine the first meeting, not a conquest, not a dramatic clash of armies, something quieter, more human. Two groups of people encountering each other, cautiously at first, then with growing curiosity. Sabaean traders arriving in the Highland markets with their bronze tools and their carved stone inscriptions and their moon-worshipping religion. Local Ago and other communities watching these newcomers with interest, observing, assessing, and gradually, over time, across decades and generations, beginning the slow, remarkable work of cultural exchange. This is how Da'amat was born, not from a single dramatic founding moment, not from a king who arrived with an army and declared a kingdom, but from the patient accumulation of connection, from the merging of two worlds, from the long, unhurried process by which people who are different slowly become people who share something. Let that sit with you for a moment. The idea that something extraordinary can be built not through force, but through patience, through contact, through the willingness to share what you know with someone who knows something different. Your breathing is slower now. The room around you has grown very quiet. The thoughts of the day are moving further away, like light seen through fog, present but softened. And what remains is this story, this ancient, patient, remarkable story. The settlements of Da'amat were not scattered haphazardly across the landscape. These were deliberate places, chosen with care, and an intimate understanding of the highland environment. When you look at the sites that archaeologists have identified, you see a pattern. These communities built on elevated ground, close to water sources, in positions that offered natural protection without the isolation that would have cut them off from trade and communication. They were practical people, grounded people, people who understood that survival required both safety and connection. The most important of these settlements, the one that shines most clearly through the archaeological record, is a place called Yeha. And Yeha, even today, even after nearly 3,000 years, remains a site of extraordinary power. If you have never seen a photograph of the Temple of Al-Makka at Yeha, imagine a building made of precisely cut stone blocks, some of them enormous, each one fitted so carefully against its neighbor that no mortar was needed. Dry stone construction at a scale that still impresses modern engineers. The walls of this temple still stand to a height of more than 12 meters. After nearly 3,000 years, they still stand. You can feel what it means to build something that lasts 3,000 years. Even lying here in the soft darkness of tonight, you can feel the weight of that achievement, the commitment required, the skill, the collective belief that what you are building matters enough to build it right, to cut each stone with precision, to lay each course level and true, to do the painstaking, slow, unspectacular work of construction with enough care that your great-great-great-grandchildren's great-great-great-grandchildren will still be standing in the shadow of what your hands made. Yeha was not simply a temple, it was the heart of a settlement. Around the temple, the community organized itself. There were dwellings, though their remains are less dramatic than the stone temple. There were areas for storage, for food preparation, for the keeping of animals. There were spaces where people gathered, where trade happened, where disputes were settled and alliances made. Yeha was what we might call a central place, a point around which a broader network of smaller settlements organized themselves. A capital, in the loose sense that ancient Highland kingdoms used the word, and surrounding Yeha, scattered across the northern Ethiopian Tigray region and into what is now Eritrea, were the other settlements of Da'amat, smaller places, farming communities, herding camps that moved with the seasons, but returned reliably to the same valleys, market sites where goods moved between the highland communities and the trade routes that connected the interior of Africa to the Red Sea coast. Each of these places was its own small world, with its own rhythms and its own history, but they were linked by trade, by religion, by language, by shared culture, by the invisible threads that connect settlements into a kingdom. You feel the weight of the blankets now, gently, comfortably. The temperature is exactly right. The darkness behind your closed eyes is complete and restful. And within that darkness, these ancient settlements begin to take shape. Not dramatically, not like a film scene, but softly, the way images come in the early stages of sleep. Impressions, really. The sense of stone, the smell of highland grass, the particular quality of light in the Ethiopian highlands just before sunrise, when the air is still cold and the sky is turning the color of embers. The people of Da'amat who lived in these settlements were farmers primarily. The highland environment they inhabited was well suited to agriculture, but it demanded respect. The rains in the Ethiopian highlands are seasonal, concentrated into 2 main rainy periods, and the rest of the year can be remarkably dry. So water management was not a luxury for these communities. It was survival. It was the difference between a harvest and a famine, between staying and leaving, between building a settlement that lasts for generations and abandoning a site when the dry years come. The people of Da'amat built reservoirs. They constructed irrigation channels. They shaped the hillsides into the terraced fields that you can still see in the Tigray region today, the same stepped landscape you imagine standing above at the beginning of this night. These terraces were engineering. Careful, intelligent, hard-won engineering developed over centuries of trial and error. A terrace wall that failed during the heavy rains could send soil sliding down the hillside, erasing a season's work in a single afternoon. So you built the walls well. You built them from stone. You built them to last. And generation after generation, you maintained them. You repaired the ones that cracked. You extended the system when more land was needed. You passed the knowledge of how to build and maintain these terraces to your children and your children's children. There is something deeply moving about this when you consider it quietly in the dark. The terraced hillsides of the Ethiopian highlands are not natural. They are the accumulated labor of thousands of years of human hands. Every terrace wall is a conversation between a person and the land, a negotiation, a compromise. The land says, I am steep, I am subject to erosion. I do not naturally hold water in the way you need me to. And the person says, I understand. And then they work with those constraints, rather than against them. They build walls that slow the water. They create flat spaces where soil can accumulate rather than wash away. They make the steep hillside productive without destroying it. You have made compromises with the world around you too. You have negotiated with circumstances that didn't bend easily to your preferences. You have found ways to make difficult terrain productive, to work with what you were given. This is not a small thing. This is, in fact, one of the oldest and most essentially human capacities. The people of Da'amat understood it. And in the quietness of this moment, you understand it too. The agricultural knowledge of Da'amat was impressive. They cultivated teff, the tiny grain that remains a staple of Ethiopian cuisine today. So ancient in this landscape that it feels almost like the land itself. They grew sorghum, wheat, barley. They tended gardens of vegetables and legumes. They kept cattle and sheep and goats, which required the management of grazing areas and water sources across a broader landscape than just the settled fields around the village. The movement of animals created a kind of geography of use around each settlement, a web of paths and pastures and watering places that extended far beyond the houses and the temple and the storage buildings. The question of exactly how Da'amat was organized politically is one that historians and archaeologists continue to debate. The evidence is incomplete, as it almost always is with civilizations this ancient. but from inscriptions and material remains, a picture emerges of a kingdom with a ruler, or perhaps a series of rulers who commanded significant resources and held authority over a broad territory. The inscriptions found at Yeha and other sites use titles that suggest royal authority. They speak of rulers in ways that echo the political vocabulary of South Arabia, the world across the water that had contributed so much to Da'amat's culture. The royal inscriptions of Da'amat are written in a script that is visually striking, even to modern eyes. It is an ancient South Arabian script, adapted for use in this African context, and it carries within it the visual DNA of the Ge'ez script that would eventually develop from it, and that is still used today to write Amharic, Tigrinya, and other Ethiopian and Eritrean languages. When you look at a line of Ge'ez script, you are looking at something that connects in a direct genealogical line all the way back to the stone inscriptions of Da'amat. The written words of this ancient Highland kingdom never entirely disappeared. They changed, they evolved, they passed through generations of adaptation. But the lineage is unbroken. There is a particular kind of wonder that comes from understanding that certain things persist, that a script developed by traders and priests in a Highland African kingdom nearly 3,000 years ago still lives in the letters used today by millions of people across Ethiopia and Eritrea, that the act of reading and writing in those particular shapes carries within it an unbroken thread reaching back to these ancient settlements, these ancient hands carving these ancient words into stone. You don't need to hold any of this tightly. Let it simply be present, floating gently in the warm darkness of your mind, the way smoke floats in still air, the way stars float in the sky above the Ethiopian highlands on a clear highland night, countless and patient and very, very old. The religion of Da'amat is one of the most interesting aspects of what we know about these settlements. The primary deity worshipped in the kingdom was a god called Almaka, the moon god. This was a deity shared with the Sabaean civilization of South Arabia, another thread in the connection between these two worlds across the Red Sea. The moon was central to agricultural life in this region, where lunar calendars helped organize the planting and harvesting cycles, where the nights were often clear enough that the moon served as a genuine source of light for work that couldn't wait for sunrise. The temple at Yeha was dedicated to Almaka. And when you think about the scale of that temple, those precisely cut stone blocks, those walls that still stand after 3 millennia, you begin to understand how central religious life was to the organization of the community. The temple was not on the outskirts of the settlement. It was at the center. It was the organizing principle around which everything else arranged itself. The people who built their homes near the temple of Almaka were placing themselves in relationship to something they understood as the most permanent and authoritative presence in their world. Worship in Da'amat involved animal sacrifice, inscribed dedications, the maintenance of sacred spaces. The priests who tended the temple of Almaka held significant social power. They mediated between the community and the divine. They preserved knowledge. They interpreted signs. They recorded events in stone. In a world Without widespread literacy, the ability to read and write the inscriptions was itself a form of power, a sacred technology, a way of participating in a conversation with the permanent record of history. Your eyes are very still now. Your breathing has settled into a rhythm so slow and steady that you are barely aware of it. The darkness behind your eyelids is complete, comfortable, absolute. And within it, these images of Da'amat continue to form and dissolve gently, like clouds. The stone temple, the carved inscriptions, the moon rising over the Highland ridge, enormous and brilliant, casting the terraced hillsides in silver light. The trade networks of Da'amat were the veins through which the kingdom's life flowed. Without trade, without the movement of goods and ideas between communities, no highland settlement could have sustained itself at the level of complexity that Da'amat achieved. The Red Sea trade routes were among the most important commercial networks in the ancient world. Goods moved between Africa, Arabia, the Indian subcontinent, and the Mediterranean through these waters. Ivory from the African interior, gold from Highland deposits, incense, frankincense, and myrrh from the trees of both the Horn of Africa and southern Arabia, animal skins, salt from the Danakil Depression, that extraordinary geological feature where the land drops below sea level and massive salt deposits formed from ancient evaporated seas. Obsidian, the volcanic glass that made extraordinarily sharp blades and was valued across a vast area of the ancient world. Da'amat sat at a strategic point in this network. The Highland Kingdom controlled access to some of these trade goods and to the routes between the coast and the interior. The coastal ports that served the Red Sea trade needed the Highland communities, and the Highland communities needed access to the goods and ideas that came through those ports. It was a relationship of mutual dependency, not always comfortable, not always equal, but durable enough to sustain the kingdom through multiple generations. You breathe in slowly and breathe out slowly, and the distance between you and sleep is very small now. Just a breath or two, just the last soft loosening of the mind's grip on the waking world. And these ancient traders are moving through your imagination, carrying their goods along mountain paths in the cool Highland morning, their feet knowing the route so well they barely need to look at the ground. Their minds already at the market, already planning the conversations, already calculating what they have and what they need. This is the world of Da'amat settlements. This is the texture of life in this ancient Highland kingdom. Not monuments and battles and dramatic proclamations, though those things existed too, but the daily texture of human community. Farmers reading the sky for rain, herders moving with their animals through the seasonal landscape, traders carrying goods along mountain paths, priests tending the stone temple in the cool Highland morning, children learning the script by tracing its shapes in dust or sand, old people sitting in the evening light, watching the stars appear over the ridge, connecting the patterns in the sky to the patterns in their own long experience. And here you are, thousands of years later, lying in your bed, also watching the dark, also carrying within you the accumulated experience of a life lived in relationship to the world around you. The distance between you and the people of Da'amat is vast in time, but in the most essential things, it is no distance at all. The settlements of Da'amat were not all the same. This is something worth holding in your mind as you rest, as the night deepens around you, as your body grows heavier and more still. The diversity of settlement types within this kingdom reflects the diversity of the highland landscape itself. A kingdom is never simply one place. It is always many places, knitted together by shared culture and political authority and economic relationship. Da'amat was no different. There were the large central settlements, places like Yeha, where political and religious authority concentrated, where the most impressive architecture rose, where the inscriptions recording royal achievements were carved into durable stone for posterity. These were the places that left the clearest mark on the archaeological record, precisely because they were built to be permanent. The temple at Yeha was built to last because the people who built it understood that permanence was itself a statement, that a structure which endured said something about the civilization that created it, something about ambition, about confidence, about the belief that what you were building deserved to stand. But beyond these central places, there were smaller agricultural villages, communities that probably numbered in the hundreds rather than the thousands. Tight clusters of stone and earthen buildings arranged around a shared water source or a particularly productive area of farmland. These communities were the foundation of the kingdom. They were where most people lived and worked and raised their children and buried their dead. They were where the actual substance of Da'amat's agricultural economy was produced. The grain and the cattle and the vegetables and the wool that fed and clothed and sustained the larger settlement hierarchy above them. You can imagine one of these smaller villages now, if you like. Not dramatically, just gently, the way imagination works in the drowsy approach to sleep. A cluster of rectangular stone buildings, their walls thick enough to hold the warmth of the Highland sun against the cool nights. Flat roofs where grain could be dried and where people might sleep during the hot season. A communal threshing floor where the harvest was processed, the hard dry stalks beaten until the grain separated and fell. A small reservoir carefully lined with stone, collecting rainwater from the surrounding hillsides. A pen where goats were kept at night, their bells occasionally sounding in the dark. In this village, there is a particular house. And in that house, tonight, a woman is grinding grain. Her arms move in the steady back and forth rhythm of the grinding stone. The sound is a soft, rhythmic scraping in the darkness. She does this every morning before the household wakes fully, because fresh ground grain makes better bread, and bread is the center of every meal. She has been grinding grain since she was old enough to hold the stone. Her mother taught her, her grandmother before that. The knowledge lives in her arms, in the particular angle of pressure, in the sense of when the grain has been ground fine enough. No one wrote this knowledge down. No inscription records it. But it is knowledge, nonetheless. Important knowledge. The kind that keeps people fed and alive and together. In another house, an old man is sitting awake in the dark. He is past sleeping through the night the way he once did. The joints of his knees ache with the cold. He wraps himself in a skin blanket and sits near the coals of the cooking fire and listens to the sound of the village at rest, the soft breathing of people and animals, the distant call of some night bird on the hillside, the settling of the stone walls as the temperature drops further toward dawn. He's been sitting like this for many years now, since his wife died, since his body decided that full nights of sleep were no longer its way. He doesn't fight it anymore. He has made peace with this particular kind of wakefulness. He finds his own companionship in the dark. Perhaps you understand something of what that old man feels, sitting awake in the Highland dark, listening to the world breathe around him. Perhaps your own nights have their own particular quality, their own texture and company. The way darkness has a presence that daylight doesn't. The way quiet can feel full rather than empty once you stop expecting it to be something else. The children of Da'amat grew up learning the world through their bodies and their senses before they ever learned it through words or symbols. They learned the smell of rain approaching across the Highland Plateau before they learned the name for the rainy season. They learned the weight of a water jar and the distance to the spring before they learned anything about trade or politics or religion. They knew which plants were safe to eat and which were not, which berries and roots and leaves their mothers and grandmothers had taught them to recognize, knowledge accumulated over countless generations of living in this specific landscape. This kind of knowledge is not simple. It is not primitive. It is extraordinarily sophisticated, the product of thousands of years of careful attention to a specific environment. The people of Da'amat settlements knew their landscape the way you know your own home. Every slope and valley and water source and soil type held meaning for them. They read the highland terrain the way you might read a map, but more fluidly, more intuitively, because it was not a representation of a place, but the place itself, known directly through a lifetime of experience. Your thoughts are drifting now, not urgently, not with any destination in mind, simply drifting, the way thoughts do when the body has relaxed and the mind has released its grip on the day. This is a good state, a restful state, the kind of state in which the mind can receive things without having to work for them. The story of Da'amat comes to you like this tonight, not as information to be retained, but as atmosphere, as presence, as the warm, gentle sense of connection to something very old and very human. The Highland nights in the Da'amat period would have been brilliant with stars. No artificial light existed anywhere on Earth. The Milky Way would have been not a pale smudge, but a vast, detailed river of light across the sky, so dense and present that it cast its own faint shadow on the ground. The people of these settlements lived in intimate relationship with the night sky in a way that is almost impossible for us to imagine now. They navigated by it, tracked time by it, organized their agricultural calendar around the movements of particular stars and constellations. The moon, their deity Al-Maka, would have been an overwhelmingly powerful presence in their nights. When the moon was full, the highland landscape would have been lit clearly enough to work by, to travel by, to see across the terraced fields to the distant ridge. And when the moon was dark, the nights would have been so absolutely black that movement became an act of memory rather than vision. You didn't walk to the spring in the dark by seeing the path. You walked it by knowing the path with your feet and your body, by the accumulated memory of 10,000 previous walks. These people slept and woke with rhythms set by the moon and the stars and the seasons in a way that connected them to the natural world completely. And there is something restful, even now, even at this distance, about remembering that this is what humans are. Creatures of the natural world. Creatures designed to rest in darkness and wake in light. Creatures whose bodies still carry within them the ancient rhythms of those Highland nights, those star-brilliant skies, that deep, unlit, absolute dark. You are part of that long story. Right now, in this bed, in this darkness, your body following rhythms that were old when Da'amat was new. Let that be a comfort to you. Let the ancient rightness of rest hold you. The first section of this night's journey ends here in the darkness of the Highland settlements, among the sleeping people of Da'amat, under the brilliant dome of an unlighted sky. You have traveled far. You have seen stone temples and terraced fields and grinding women and wakeful old men and children who knew their landscape like their own heartbeat. You have arrived somewhere quiet, somewhere restful, somewhere that asks nothing of you except your presence. Stay here for a while, in the dark, in the warmth, in the ancient, patient, unhurried quiet of a Highland night. We will continue together when you're ready. There is more of Da'amat waiting, more settlements to visit, more threads of this ancient human story to follow through the dark. But for now, simply rest, simply breathe, simply be here, as the people of Da'amat were here so long ago, under the same patient stars. You are still here, still resting, still held by the warmth of this quiet space you have made for yourself in the dark. And the story of Da'amat is still here too, patient and unhurried, waiting for you the way all ancient things wait, without urgency, without demand, simply present, the way stone is present, the way the Highland air is present, the way the past is always present, just beneath the surface of the world we inhabit without quite seeing it. Take a slow breath now. Feel the air fill your lungs and release. And as it releases, feel yourself settle a little deeper into rest. Your body knows what to do. It has always known. And tonight, in this warmth, in this darkness, there is nowhere it needs to go, and nothing it needs to accomplish. It simply needs to be still, and it is still, and you are held. We left the settlements sleeping under their brilliant canopy of stars. We left the woman grinding grain in the pre-dawn dark, her arms moving in the ancient rhythm of the stone. We left the old man sitting near his cooling fire, keeping company with the night. Now the darkness is beginning to thin, not quickly. Highland dawns come slowly at this altitude, the sky lightening by careful degrees, grey deepening to blue, blue warming toward the first pale golds and pinks of a sun still hidden below the eastern ridge. The birds begin before the light fully arrives. Small birds in the thorn bush, a single call answered by another, then another. A conversation that spreads across the hillside like water spreading across flat stone. This is the hour when the settlements of Da'amat stirred back into life, when the fires were coaxed from embers, when water jars were lifted onto strong shoulders and carried down the path to the spring, when herders rose and called to their animals and began the day's movement across the grazing landscape. When the priests who tended the temple of Almaka woke in the pre-dawn dark and began the ritual preparations that structured every day within the sacred precincts of Yeha. The settlements of Da'amat were connected not only by trade and politics and shared religion, but by something older and harder to name, by relationship, by the accumulated weight of generations of knowing one another. In small communities, everyone's story is part of everyone else's story. The woman who grinds grain before dawn is the daughter of the woman who ground grain before her. The herder who knows every water source in the grazing landscape learned that knowledge from his father and his uncle and his older brothers, walking the routes with them in his childhood until the knowledge became part of his body. The priest who tends the temple learned the rituals from the priest before him, who learned them from the priest before that. The chain of transmission stretching back generation after generation into the founding of the community itself. This is what it means to live in a place across deep time, not just to inhabit a physical location, but to be embedded in a living web of knowledge and relationship and memory that extends far beyond any single lifetime. The settlements of Da'amat were not merely places, they were communities. And communities are made not of buildings, but of the connections between people, of the obligations and affections and histories that bind individuals to one another and to the place they share. You feel the weight of your own connections now, lying here in the dark. The people who shaped you, the places that formed you, the accumulated weight of relationships across a lifetime. Like the people of Da'amat, you too are embedded in a web that extends beyond yourself in all directions. Forward to the people who will carry something of you into the future. Backward to everyone who shaped what you became. You are never simply alone, even in the most solitary moment. You carry your entire history with you. You are the sum of every connection you have ever made. The crafts of Da'amat settlements deserve attention in the quiet of this night, because they tell us something important about these people that the inscriptions and the temple and the political structures don't tell us. The crafts tell us about daily life at its most intimate, about the choices people made when they were making things for themselves and for the people they loved, not for a king or a god or a permanent record in stone. The pottery of Da'amat was functional and refined, made for storing grain, carrying water, cooking food. But the potters who made these vessels also decorated them, pressing patterns into the wet clay before firing, creating surfaces that went beyond mere utility. This was a choice, a decision that the object you spend your time making should be beautiful as well as useful, that the water jar your daughter carries to the spring should please the eye as well as serve the body, that beauty and function are not opposites but companions. This understanding that everyday objects deserve care and attention, that utility does not excuse ugliness, is an understanding you probably share. You have chosen things in your life for how they feel and look as well as for what they do. You have understood in your own way what those Da'amat potters understood, that a life lived among beautiful things is a richer life than a life lived among merely functional ones. The bronze tools and implements that appear in the archaeological record of Da'amat's settlements speak of metallurgical knowledge imported partly from the Sabaean world across the water and developed locally over generations. Bronze axes and chisels and adzes and hooks, the physical tools through which people shaped their world. A bronze chisel in a damat craftsman's hand could cut stone more precisely than any previous technology available in the region. It was the edge between one world and another, the difference between the rough-hewn and the precisely finished, between the temporary and the permanent. Your breathing is very slow, and even now, your chest rises and falls in a rhythm so gentle, it barely disturbs the stillness of the room. And somewhere in the soft darkness behind your closed eyes, the Highland plateau of ancient Da'amat continues its slow, unhurried existence. The sun is fully up now over the settlements. The day is underway. The sounds of community fill the air, children calling to each other across the village. The clang of metal on stone from the workshop where someone is sharpening a blade, the low conversation of women working together at the threshing floor, their voices weaving into and out of the rhythmic sound of their labor, the bark of a dog, the complaint of a goat, the distant song of a herder on the hillside, his voice carrying down across the terraced fields. Imagine the market at Yeha. Imagine arriving there on a morning when traders have come from the coastal lowlands, from settlements further into the Highland interior, from communities to the north in what is now Eritrea, from the south where other kingdoms and confederacies occupied the highlands, each group bringing something the others needed or wanted. Salt from the Danakil, so precious in a world without refrigeration that it served as currency. Obsidian blades, sharp and precise, from the volcanic deposits that dotted the eastern escarpment. Cotton cloth, dyed with the rich colors that traders from the Arabian coast brought with their sophisticated textile knowledge. Dried fish from the Red Sea coast, protein that could travel without spoiling in the highland air, honey from the bees that the highland communities kept in traditional hives, carved logs hung in the trees near flowering shrubs, leather goods made from the hides of cattle and goats worked until they were supple and durable. And among all these goods, moving through the market like water through stone, information, news, stories, the particular currency of an interconnected world that has no written newspapers, no messengers hired specifically to carry information, no reliable system for learning what is happening beyond the range of direct personal knowledge. Information travels in the mouths of traders and travelers. It arrives imprecise and partial and sometimes inaccurate, but it arrives. And in its arriving, the settlements of Da'amat remain connected to the broader world. They know, after a fashion, what is happening on the other side of the ridge, what the rains were like this season in the valley to the north, whether the caravan from the coast is expected, whether a particular Highland chief has died and left his territory in dispute. You have lived in a world of information too, though the technology of its transmission is almost inconceivably different from anything the people of Da'amat knew. But the fundamental human need that information serves is the same. The need to know what is happening, to feel connected to the world beyond your immediate experience, to understand the context in which your own life is taking place. The trader at the Da'amat market, who carried news of distant events, was serving the same deep human need that you serve when you reach for your phone, or open a newspaper, or lean over a fence to talk to a neighbor. The specific technology changes across centuries and millennia. The need does not. In the settlement, in the shade of a thick stone wall, an elder is talking to a group of young people. You can imagine this scene without difficulty, because it is a scene that has played out in human communities across every civilization and every era. The older person passing something essential to the younger ones, not necessarily formal knowledge, not a lesson with a defined structure and a test at the end, but something more fundamental. The elder is telling a story about something that happened in the settlement long ago, before the young people were born, about a decision that was made well or badly, about a consequence that followed, about what it means to be part of this community, this place, this lineage. Every society tells its stories. Every community has its repertoire of narratives about where it came from and what it values and what happens to people who violate its core principles. These stories are not merely entertainment. They are the technology through which values are transmitted across generations, through which the hard-won knowledge of the past is made available to people who haven't had the time yet to learn it through direct experience, through which a community maintains its sense of itself across the disruptions and changes of time. The women of Da'amat settlements were the backbone of daily life in ways that the archaeological and inscriptional record only partially captures. The inscriptions, carved in stone by and for the literate elite, speak mostly of kings and gods and military achievements and royal dedications. They tell us about the visible, public, formally recorded history of the kingdom, but the actual substance of life, the daily labor that kept the communities functioning, that fed and clothed and healed and educated, this was largely the domain of women, whose work left fewer marks in stone, but left deep marks in everything else. The management of household food stores required sophisticated knowledge of preservation, fermentation, and storage. Grain had to be dried precisely, or it would mold. Different vessels were used for different purposes. The fermentation of grain into injera, the spongy sourdough flatbread that has been the staple of Ethiopian cuisine for thousands of years, required a starter culture maintained from batch to batch, a living substance that had to be fed and tended. Tella, the traditional fermented grain drink, required similar knowledge and care. This was biochemistry without the name, microbiology without microscopes, the practical, embodied knowledge of how living things behave, gained through generations of careful observation and practice, the children of the settlements played. This is something we know with certainty, not because it is recorded in any inscription, but because children everywhere in every era of human history have played. They played the games that Highland children play in every generation. They chased each other across the threshing floors and the open spaces between buildings. They imitated the adults around them in the way that children's play is always partly preparation, partly rehearsal for the life that is coming. Little girls pretended to grind grain with small flat stones. Little boys pretended to herd animals, driving invisible cattle with small sticks across imaginary grazing grounds. They played at trading in the market, at building temples, at being kings and priests and the mysterious figures from the stories the elders told. And on cool Highland evenings, when the day's work was done and the cooking fires were burning and the settlement had gathered itself inward against the coming night, the children played around the fires while the adults talked. And sometimes the talk became storytelling, and sometimes the storytelling became singing, and the children fell asleep in the firelight, or were carried sleeping to their beds with the sounds of adult voices in their ears, the murmur of the community at rest, the sound that meant safety, the sound that meant home. You know that sound, in some version of it, from your own childhood, your own life, the murmur of people you trusted, talking in the next room, or on the porch, or across the fire, the sound that allowed your body to relax completely, because somewhere below conscious thought, you understood that the adults were awake and attending, and that you were therefore safe to sleep. Your body still carries that understanding. Right now, in this dark and quiet room, your body is releasing into the same ancient trust that the world is attended, that you are safe, that sleep is allowed. The seasons shaped everything in Da'amat settlements. More completely, more fundamentally, than seasons shape life in the modern world, where artificial light and climate control and global food supply chains have softened the edges of what it means to live in a particular climate. For the people of these highland communities, the seasons were not background, they were foreground. They determined what work needed to be done on any given day, what could be eaten, how much fuel was available for fires, whether travel between settlements was easy or treacherous, whether the animals were fat and healthy or thin and struggling. The Ethiopian Highland year was organized around two main rainfall periods, the short rains of spring and the long rains of summer, which the Amharic language would eventually call the Kiram. These rains were not guaranteed. They could fail. They could arrive too late or too early. They could come too violently, washing soil from hillsides and destroying crops with floods rather than nourishing them. Or they could be insufficient, leaving the soil too dry and the harvest too thin. Every year contained the possibility of abundance and the possibility of hardship. The people of Da'amat understood this. They planned for it. They stored surpluses in good years. They maintained the irrigation systems that could distribute water more evenly across the landscape. They kept animals as a buffer against crop failure, a mobile reserve of protein and wealth that could survive drought better than planted fields. This kind of careful, prudent management of resources across time, the practice of planning for the future while living fully in the present, is one of the defining characteristics of settled agricultural civilization, and it required a particular relationship with time, a long view, the understanding that what you do today will have consequences months or years from now, that the terrace wall you build carefully this season will protect your fields for the next generation, that the surplus grain you store in a good year is the food your children will eat in a hard one. You have lived with this understanding too, in your own way, in your own era. the choices you made years or decades ago that shape the life you are living now, the habits you built or failed to build, the connections you maintained or let go, the investments of time and energy whose returns came slowly over years in ways you could not always predict. The long view is a difficult thing to maintain in any era. The present is always vivid and demanding. The future is always abstract and uncertain. But the people of Da'amat somehow managed it. They built for centuries. They planted orchards they would not live to harvest fully. They carved inscriptions they knew would outlast them. They built the Temple of Almaka with a care that can only be explained by their belief that it should still be standing long after everyone who built it was gone. And it is still standing. The walls of the Temple of Almaka at Yeha are still standing tonight, right now. While you lie here in the warm dark of your own night, those ancient stone blocks are sitting exactly where the hands of Da'amat's builders placed them nearly 3,000 years ago. They have survived the fall of the kingdom. They have survived the rise of the Aksumite empire that followed. They have survived the conversion of the region to Christianity, when the temple was converted into a church and new meanings were layered over old ones. They have survived wars and invasions and droughts and floods and the simple, relentless passage of time that erodes everything eventually. They are still there, patient, permanent, a conversation in stone between the people who built them and us, their unimaginably distant descendants. There is something profound in that survival, something that reaches through the dark of this night and touches something deep in you. The human desire to build things that last, to leave a mark, to say, in whatever medium is available, we were here. We thought and felt and worked and loved and built. We mattered. And the stone says, yes, you did. You still do. Across all this time, you still do. Your body is very still now, deeply still. The kind of stillness that comes when the body has truly released its day and settled into the knowledge that rest is allowed, that this night is yours, that nothing is required of you between now and morning except this, simply being here, simply breathing, simply allowing the long, patient, extraordinary story of human civilization to move through your resting mind like light moves through still water. The decline of Da'amat is one of the most interesting mysteries in the history of the Horn of Africa. Sometime around the 5th century BCE, the archaeological and inscriptional record of the kingdom begins to thin. The great stone building projects slow. The inscriptions become fewer. The political authority that had organized the Highland settlements into a coherent kingdom seems to fragment. And eventually, over generations, the specific identity of Da'amat as a distinct political entity fades from the record. What happened? The honest answer is that we don't know with certainty. History is full of silences like this, places where the evidence runs out before the story does. Some scholars suggest that the kingdom's decline was related to a shift in the Red Sea trade routes, a realignment of commercial networks that reduced the strategic advantage Da'amat's position had provided. Others point to the possibility of extended droughts, the kind of multi-year rainfall failures that have periodically devastated agricultural civilizations across the highland regions of northeast Africa. Others suggest that the kingdom did not so much decline as transform, that the political structures of Da'amat evolved over time into the local dynasties and confederacies that would eventually coalesce into the Aksumite kingdom, the great empire that rose in the same highland region around the 1st century of the Common Era. This last possibility is the most comforting in a way, because it suggests that Da'amat did not simply end, it became something else. It transformed the way all living things transform, the way the child becomes the adult without the child ever truly disappearing, the way the young couple becomes the long-married pair without the passion of the beginning being entirely forgotten, the way a settlement grows into a town into a city into a ruin into an archaeological site into a story that someone tells in the dark, while another person listens with their eyes closed, resting, breathing slowly, drifting toward sleep. Da'amat became Aksum. Aksum became the Christian Kingdom of Ethiopia, one of the oldest Christian nations on earth. That kingdom's traditions and institutions echo through the centuries into the present. And the script that Da'amat's people carved into stone, the ancient South Arabian letters adapted for African use, evolved through stages into the Ge'ez script that is still used today. So Da'amat did not disappear. It continued in the land, in the language, in the script, in the agricultural terraces that still shape the highlands, in the culture and the religion and the architecture of descendants who may never have heard the name Da'amat, but who carry it in their inheritance nonetheless. Nothing truly ends. This is one of the great consolations that history offers if you look at it in the long view. The things that matter find ways to continue. The knowledge that is genuinely essential gets passed on, even when the civilization that developed it crumbles. The agricultural wisdom that terraced the Ethiopian highlands is still there, still in use, still shaping the landscape. The script that Da'amat's priests carved is still in use, still carrying human meaning and human breath and human thought across the page. The impulse toward beautiful buildings, toward sacred spaces, toward the marking of important moments with permanent physical forms. This impulse did not die with Da'amat. It simply moved forward, as it always has, into whoever came next. And now it has moved all the way forward to you, to tonight, to this moment in which you lie in the dark, carrying within you the entire accumulated inheritance of human civilization. Every improvement, every discovery, every insight that was won through struggle and passed on through teaching. The terraced fields of Da'amat are in your inheritance. The script is in your inheritance. The understanding that communities are built on relationship and that knowledge is passed through care and that beauty matters and that the long view is worth maintaining. All of this is in your inheritance. It arrived to you through an unbroken chain of transmission, reaching back through every civilization that contributed to the making of the world you were born into. You rest in the warmth of all of that tonight, without needing to name it, without needing to trace the chain link by link, simply resting in the accumulated warmth of everything that has been done and known and built and passed on by the billions of human beings who lived before you. You are not alone in time. You are surrounded by it, held warmly within it, made possible by all of it. The Highland evening is coming to the settlements of Da'amat now, in the landscape of your imagination. The sun is dropping behind the western ridge, and the light is turning that particular warm gold that the highlands do so beautifully in the late afternoon. The long shadows of the stone buildings stretch across the terraced fields. The herders are bringing the animals home. The fires in the settlement are being built up against the approaching chill. The smell of cooking spreads from house to house. The particular smell of grain and oil and smoke that has been the smell of supper in settlements across the world for as long as there have been settlements at all. People are gathering at the edges of their doorways, at the communal spaces between buildings, at the water source where the day's last drawing must be done. They are talking. They are sharing the events of the day, the small dramas and discoveries and transactions that make up the texture of daily life. The act of gathering and talking and eating together is not incidental to the life of a settlement. It is the life of the settlement. It is the mechanism by which a group of individual people becomes something more than a collection of individuals. Become a we, a shared identity, a people with a common story and a common future. You have been part of many of these gatherings in your life. The dinner tables and the fireplaces and the porches and the backyards where the day was shared and the community was made. These moments are the substance of a life, not the dramatic moments, not the events that end up in the story you tell about yourself, but the quiet, ordinary, recurring moments of being together with people who matter to you. The moments that seem unremarkable while they are happening and reveal themselves as irreplaceable only in retrospect. The people of Da'amat settlements gathered around their fires every evening and probably thought little about how precious the gathering was. They were simply living, and that is exactly right. That is exactly what living is. The night is fully here now over Da'amat. The stars have emerged in their thousands, their tens of thousands, their hundreds of thousands. The moon is rising, their god Almaka, faithful in silver, casting his light across the stone temple, across the terrace fields, across the sleeping village, across the ridge and the valley and the next ridge beyond. The fires have burned down to coals. The voices have quieted. The breathing of the settlement has shifted from waking breath to sleeping breath, slower and deeper. The collective exhalation of a community releasing its day and surrendering to rest. And you are here, in this moment, in this bed, breathing with them across 3,000 years. Your breath as slow as theirs, your body as still as theirs, your mind as loose and drifting as the minds of people who have given themselves over to sleep, to the dark, to the restorative mystery of rest that none of us fully understand, but all of us need, all of us trust, even if we could not say why we trust it, that we will wake, that the body knows what to do in the dark, that morning will come. The people of Da'amat trusted morning too. Every night they lay down under their skin blankets in their stone houses, and they trusted that the sun would rise over the eastern ridge, and the day would begin again, and there would be work to do and food to eat, and people to be with, and a life to live. That trust was not naive. They knew that some mornings there were fewer people than the night before. That illness and accident and the ordinary attrition of mortality took people in the night. They knew that not every morning was the same as the one before, but they lay down anyway. They closed their eyes anyway. They trusted the morning anyway. You trust the morning too. You have always trusted the morning. In all the years of your life, across all the mornings that have followed all the nights, you have lain down and trusted, and the morning has come every time. It has come different, sometimes radically different from what you expected or hoped, but it has come, and you have met it. And here you are, in this bed, in this dark, in this ancient rhythm of rest that connects you to every human being who has ever existed on this earth. The ones in the Da'amat settlements who looked at the same stars. The ones in every civilization, in every era, who lay down at the end of their days and trusted the dark with their most vulnerable selves. You are part of that lineage tonight. You're part of that vast, patient, unbroken human story. Rest now. The settlements of Da'amat are sleeping. The temple of Almaka is standing in the moonlight. Its ancient stones cool and still, its walls carrying within them the memory of all the hands that shaped them. The terraced fields are quiet, holding the moisture in their carefully constructed levels, waiting for the morning. The people are sleeping, the woman whose arms remember the grinding stone, the old man who has made peace with the dark, the children who fell asleep in the firelight, the herders and the traders and the priests and the farmers, all sleeping, all breathing slowly, all held in the warm dark of a Highland night 3,000 years ago. And you are held too, in your own warm dark, by your own patient night, by the ancient rightness of rest that has been the gift of darkness, since before there were cities or kingdoms or temples or scripts, since before there were words for any of it. The gift was always there. The gift is here now. The fires die down, the stories settle, and the world grows still. Let your thoughts drift away like embers on the wind. Good night. You have journeyed far through time tonight, across 3,000 years of Highland stone and terraced fields and moon-worshipping priests and grain-grinding women and wakeful elders and playing children and the magnificent, enduring temple that still stands in Yeha as this night falls over its ancient stones and your resting body. Now it is time to journey into dreams. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly, and let sleep find you now. It knows where you are. It has always known. And like the moon rising, faithful and silver over the Da'amat highlands, patient and exact and already on time, it is already here.